Hi, everyone. This is Rhonda Taylor from the Corporation for National and Community Service. Before we get started, I want to tell you who you'll be hearing from today and also to set a little bit of context. This webinar will be largely focused on the 9/11 National Day of Service and Remembrance, but really the content that you'll hear will be valuable for any day of service and probably for many of your volunteer activities. In just a few minutes, you'll hear from some of our colleagues and partners. Sharon already introduced herself. You'll also hear from our other colleague, Sarah Fry, a little bit later. Our partners in the field, David Payne, Jay Winnick, and Jennifer Labriola from My Good Deed, Amy Cohen, and Emily Sanos from George Washington University, the Nashman Center for Civic and Public Engagement. I probably got that slightly wrong, Amy. You'll correct it when you speak. And Karen Daniel and Michael Minks from YSA Youth Service America. So with that, I'll turn it over to our colleagues from My Good Deed.
Well, good afternoon, good morning to everyone, depending upon where you are. This is David Payne. I am the co-founder and president of the nonprofit group called My Good Deed, which, as you know, was created by the 9/11 community in 2002 with the goal of establishing September 11th as a National Day of Service under federal law. And of course, that was achieved under the Serve America Act in 2009. And today our organization helps to lead the organization of the 9/11 Day Observance, which is what it's now called, all across the country. And so we're delighted to have the opportunity to speak with you today, especially in today's very challenging environment for service and for nonprofits in particular. And you know, this approaching 9/11 Day of Service, I think, couldn't be more important and vital for a wide range of reasons. As you might imagine, if you're a member of the 9/11 community that lost a loved one, the way you see the COVID experience and what's been happening in our country, you see it as an opportunity for the nation to remember the way we all responded after September 11th, the remarkable spirit of togetherness and unity that helped us overcome that difficult time, and how that in many respects became a model for how our country has dealt with many other tragedies and disasters since then, whether it's Katrina or many other things. And so this 9/11 is an opportunity for all of us to think about how powerful service can be in bringing us together and to lift us up in dealing with a very, very difficult time. So we're, of course, interested in sharing with you what our plans are for the day broadly. As you know, we're essentially an umbrella organization intended to create a climate and of opportunity that allows your organizations to participate in the day and have success in it. And of course, we have some very important and significant plans that we'd like to share with you, involving how we're pivoting to a virtual 9/11 Day of Service and how you can participate in that program and leverage it for your own benefit and for the benefit of all the constituencies and groups that you support. I'd like to take a moment to turn it over to my good friend and co-founder, Jay Winnick, to tell you a little bit about his personal story and really what 9/11 Day is all about, so that you can, at least for a moment here, sort of understand the fundamental DNA of the entity and then in the organization and the movement. And then we'll get right into some of the programs for this year, and then invite our terrific partners at George Washington University and YSA to share some very specific program-related case studies. So Jay, I assume you're there, and I'd turn it over to you. Assuming you're not on mute. Jay, I'm not hearing you. Yeah, it doesn't seem like he is able to participate as a panelist. So I will. He's listening, and he sends his regards. But I did want to just tell you briefly that Jay is a 9/11 family member. He lost his brother Glenn in the collapse of the World Trade Center South Tower, and Glenn was an attorney who worked at the law firm Holland and Knight, but he was also a volunteer firefighter and a trained EMT. And like a lot of heroes, when the World Trade Center towers were attacked, which were just a block and a half from his law office, he did what a lot of heroes did. He grabbed a medical kit and raced into the South Tower and was in the process of getting people out when the building came down. And unfortunately, he lost his life. And Jay, in partnership with 40 other 9/11 leaders, came together with the idea of taking the day back from the terrorists. We didn't really want them to forever define for literally generations to come how our nation was going to remember 9/11. We wanted our children and their children to learn about not about what the terrorists did to us, but the extraordinary way in which our country overcame that disaster through the goodness and the compassion of people expressed through service and through just kindness and help. And so that became the basis for turning 9/11 into a day of service. And then, as you know, it's now grown to become the largest day of charitable engagement in the country, where more than 30 million people get out and serve every year. So it's been a labor of love for me and for Jay. And with that, I'd like to maybe jump ahead to the slide that talks a little bit about what we're going to be doing for the 20th anniversary, or rather for 2020 this year. So 9/11 Day at Home. Like all of you, we realize that in this COVID environment, we have to think differently about how organizations and people can participate. And we are now working very closely with many partners, nonprofits, the Corporation for National and Community Service, and other organizations to create what we believe will be the largest day of virtual volunteering ever held in observance of the September 11th National Day of Service and Remembrance this year. And we're calling that program 9/11 Day at Home. This program will sort of publicly launch for the nation around the 20th of August. But between now and then, you will all have an opportunity to register, to participate, to receive toolkits, to receive a wide array of free materials, including turnkey emails and printed literature that you can use as a basis for participating yourself. What's important for you to know and to think about when you consider 9/11 Day at Home is that it is an umbrella program for you. Think of it to some degree like Giving Tuesday, which is it's your opportunity to reach out to your constituents, to people that support you, and to enroll them in supporting your mission. So we're not asking you to support our mission. We're asking you to participate in getting out to the nation and get them to support your mission and other missions. That's how 9/11 Day at Home is intended to work. And so if you send me an email now over the next couple of days at info@911day.org, I'll be able to send you some pre-registration information. We will have an actual registration page that'll come up in a couple of weeks, and working with CNCS, we'll get that sent to you. But if you want to get a head start on it, just go to info@911day.org, send me and Jay an email, and we'll start getting the toolkits and resources to you to give you a little bit of a head start. How the program works is relatively simple. So what we're essentially going to be doing is asking Americans to do at least one service-related good deed in observance of 9/11 this year. And on our website, which will be a new site that will launch around the middle of August, we'll be publishing 11 sort of curated good deeds that are going to span a wide range of topics that are going to be particularly important. Things like homelessness, hunger, domestic violence, ending racism, climate change, I think we have a total of 9 different programs that we're going to be specifically supporting, and we'll have good deeds that will be provided for people to consider under each of those program ideas. And they're all intended to be relatively easy for people to do. Now, that'll be our program. You have the opportunity, though, to create your own 11 good deeds for 9/11 Day that are specific to your program, and just encourage everybody that support you, let them know that you're participating in the National 9/11 Day at Home program, and that you encourage them to do so as well, and that they can participate through you by coming to your website and considering some of the virtual volunteer opportunities that you're planning, or to sign up for a particular virtual volunteering project that you have in mind. That's simply what it's really all about. So it's a relatively easy program. And again, we'll have a very detailed toolkit that'll be available to you probably within just a couple of weeks at the latest. So you can go to the next slide. We wanted to maybe just briefly touch on some of the things that we've learned over the last few months as we've been dealing with COVID, to maybe give you some guidance when you're thinking about your own program activities, and to prepare you for the same things that we encountered when we started contemplating whether we could do physical projects or not. As you may know, 9/11 Day runs large-scale volunteer projects in many cities all around the nation, and we focus typically on hunger relief, where we have thousands of volunteers come together in many cities and they pack meals for people in need. Because of the important issue involving hunger and food insecurity, we were working very hard up until literally a few weeks ago to see if there might be a way to fashion these physical projects in a way that would allow us to proceed with those events, pack meals, deliver them to local food banks and pantries, and provide some assistance to the many people that are dealing with the COVID, the impacts in their ability to get food every single day. So we worked very hard to try to accomplish that. Ultimately, we found we couldn't proceed. And what we realized was that as much as we had designed every possible social distancing, safety program following careful protocol developed by local health departments working with food banks, we had substantially reduced the number of volunteers we were considering. We were, bringing them into very large modern facilities that had giant ceilings and all of these things. We were doing everything we could. In the end, I think all of our partners and many of the volunteers that were going to be asked to help staff them just did not feel that they would be safe and comfortable enough to do it. And we just aren't and weren't in the business of trying to put anybody at risk. So we pivoted away from that toward the 9/11 Day at Home program. But I would suggest to you that if you're going to do any kind of physical volunteering at all, just be aware that it could be at the very last minute that you encounter resistance and problems. And that includes monitoring ever-changing local and state guidelines for group events and gatherings. We were a green light in many cities as of like a week and a half ago, and in almost every one of those communities we're not today. So there are some big changes, and I would just encourage you, to the degree that you can, to not do anything that might put anybody at risk. Stay away from indoor venues. It's just not totally clear exactly how the virus is being spread. There's no guarantee that 6 feet is really sufficient. Air conditioning may even be a factor in how it gets spread. Now we're not really sure, so be very, very careful. You can go to the next slide. There are some resources that you can certainly explore. You can come to our website now. We have a lot of great information there. Just generally, this is not the new program to support 9/11 Day at Home. You will not see anything new about that there yet. But if you want more information about the Day of Service in general, that's a great place to start. You can also go to nationalservice.gov and the September 11th link that you see here, and go to the 9/11 Memorial and Museum, which has a lot of terrific resources, particularly if you're looking for educational related programs. If you're looking for something in particular, or you need help fashioning your program, you've got questions, email us at info@911day. We're here to be a resource to you, to guide you and to give you direction and to point you in toward good partners and resources that may be helpful. Go to the next slide, thank you. With that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to our terrific partners at George Washington and at YSA to talk to you in more detail about exactly how they're dealing with the pandemic in their particular service environments. Amy?
Thank you, David. And thanks, everyone. It's so wonderful to be here and to see so many friends. I'm Amy Cohen. I'm the Executive Director of the George Washington University Honey Nashman Center for Civic Engagement and Public Service. And to keep the flow rolling, each of us who speaks next on this slide will introduce ourselves as we go forward. So we can have the next slide, please. So the George Washington University's Center for Civic Engagement and Public Service, our office, is really a full service civic engagement office. We are the primary hub at our university, which has about 25,000 students, for service and civic engagement. This is our mission statement. We really are looking to develop students as individuals, academically and civically, and primarily our focus is on building and maintaining service partnerships and reciprocal partnerships between our university and nonprofits and public organizations outside of our campus. We can go to the next slide. And we do this through a variety of different strategies. One of the ways that we have become involved in this is we've been a partner with 911day.org for many years now, more than 10 years now, because we do a large-scale service event at the beginning of every school year for the 9/11 Day. We also do a large-scale service event for Martin Luther King Jr. Day in January, as many of you do, I'm sure. And we do a variety of other large-scale service events. Generally, we get our students involved in long-term community service. We have a social innovation hub, and the primary way that we want to change the way that education is delivered through our university is through community engaged scholarship, where we have faculty engaging in a variety of courses where students are serving in the community. We host a couple community programs in Washington, D.C., one in arts and one with the public schools, and then we host a variety of other kinds of activities. And we can move on to the next slide. Again, in doing this, we became long-term partners with 911day.org. And we began to think, Emily Samos, who you'll hear from in a moment, and I, about how we could reach out to other educational organizations. And so for the last couple of years, we've been meeting with both K-12 organizations and those in community-based groups that work with school-aged young people, as well as with higher eds, so that we could also focus on young adults in figuring out how they might engage in 9/11 Day of Service. Most recently, in this last spring, we began hosting roundtables initially in person, and then as COVID and the pandemic became more prevalent, we switched to online listening sessions. We did some research to identify which campuses were already engaged in service, and did some targeted outreach to generate awareness of our work. And so we've had a whole series of brainstorming and listening sessions about service in the time of COVID. To the next slide. And we're going to talk about those in a few moments and some of the things that we heard from others. But our questions were really, were the ones you see on the screen. How can we rethink this day of service and think about how we're engaging students, but also adults, in individual service and or in organized group virtual service? The question we always ask when we're doing days of service is, how do we make this kind of service significant and meaningful? And then finally, how can we most effectively organize and facilitate reflection? Because we know that what really makes service meaningful is the reflection that you undertake. If you bring this into your own worldview, or you compare it to what you already know, you begin to make a change. So we can go to the next slide. And one of the ways that we began to think about doing this COVID gave us an opportunity to broaden our conceptions of service. This slide that you see comes from Stanford University's Haas Center for Public Service. It's a similar center at Stanford. And they have created a way of thinking about the pathways of public service. This is the way we do service, but in the time of COVID, we can really begin to think beyond direct service and to doing other kinds of service. So for example, how can we use the Day of Service as an opportunity to do community engaged learning? How can our students and folks who are students of all ages become involved in our community and do some research about that and publish it? Policy and governance. One of the things we were considering is how can we help people begin to learn how to, for example, write a letter to the editor about an issue that they care about. How can they learn about the ways in which policy is made for example, waterways in their community? And we're thinking about how can we do philanthropy, community organizing and activism, and what opportunities might we have for social entrepreneurship and corporate social responsibility during these days of service, really trying to widen the lens out as we think about the kinds of activities that we can do. So for the next slide, I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the examples that we've already adapted during the pandemic. My office is a Jumpstart AmeriCorps grantee. Jumpstart is an early childhood AmeriCorps program, and we are a sub-grantee. When the pandemic hit in March, we still wanted to continue to engage with the early childhood programs and the children that we served. And so our core members adapted their service to creating packets of information that we could send home to children and their families so that they can continue the literacy and social emotional learning that they were doing through Jumpstart. So we coordinated with our partner schools and were able to send information or send packets home either on paper and with the actual product, or we were able to send home on computer for those families that had the ability to download. In addition, we have an AmeriCorps Vista partnership, the GWDC Public School Partnership, where this summer, in partnership with the District of Columbia Public Schools and with other colleges in our region, we have been deploying students as tutors, mentors, and program facilitators, again, through early childhood education at our high schools and in middle schools, doing online tutoring and finding ways to adapt those programs. In addition, we have created a new enrichment program where we're doing a civic education service learning program for middle schoolers, where our students are coming, our middle school students are coming up with ideas about how to address climate change, how to address COVID-19 and the pandemic, or how to address racism. They get to pick which topic area, and actually today they were narrowing it down and trying to figure out what they could do in their own community to make a difference. And finally, we have an outreach program where we had to adapt in March as well, and we were able to send home art supplies, basic art supplies, to our K-12 students who are taking art classes with us, because these are students who don't have paper, pens, markers at home. And so we were able to send home packets and adapt our programs for what's coming in the pandemic. And the final thing that I would say is, as I mentioned, we do a large-scale day of service at the beginning of every semester for 9/11. Normally, we have 2,000 students at 50 sites on 50 buses serving for 4 hours on one day. This year, we've come up with what we're now calling, instead of Welcome Day of Service, Welcome Days of Service, multiple days, because we can't go in and set up classrooms. So we're doing a number of virtual projects. For example, we're serving with the Smithsonian Museums, they have a transcription service that anyone can access, and you can transcribe the artifacts in all of the museums. We're working with the National Archives and becoming citizen archivists, again, transcribing the documents and the artifacts in the National Archives. In addition, we are doing socially distanced service, things like weed pulling and invasive species removal, trail building, where we're able to keep our service participants more than 6 feet apart. And the key is getting people to those sites. We're not able to use buses for social distance reasons, so we're putting them on the metro and figuring out how to get them there. So we've had to adapt a good number of what we're doing. And I'm going to pass it on now to Emily Samos, who's going to talk about some of the other ideas that we've heard in the roundtables that I spoke about from colleges across the country.
Thanks, Amy, and hi, everybody. I'm Emily Samos, and I'm a consultant working with various organizations, out-of-school time organizations, higher ed, youth development organizations. And I go way back with national service. I date myself, but I was class 2 AmeriCorps. And so it's been really great to be working with Amy and David again, and thinking about and organizing around how we can get the K-12 audience and the higher ed audience involved in 9/11 Day of Service, and especially for the 20th anniversary. And as Amy said, you know, we did a lot of work to organize and engage folks around this, and then, you know, then March happened and COVID-19 happened. And so we were planning to do several conference presentations to get more engagement in 9/11 Day, and obviously that all changed. So instead, what we did, it's been really interesting, we held a series of brainstorming sessions or listening sessions. And so first in May, we did a session with the K-12 and out-of-school time audience that featured the Youth Service America, who you'll hear from in a little bit. But really just to generate ideas and gain ideas about how are folks thinking about adapting their service projects? How are they planning to adapt their service projects? Are they thinking about the ways that they can still honor 9/11 Day through service this September, given the current situation? And so these ideas that you see here are the ideas that were generated from those discussions. And so just, you know, it's a couple of ideas, the idea to use 9/11 Day to launch a year-long commitment to service. So honor honoring 9/11 through service by kind of having students sign on. And I do want to say, like our work has been focused on the K-12 audience, out-of-school time audience, and the higher ed audience, but these ideas really do cut across all ages. And you know, if you're working with adults, you're working with seniors, these same ideas can be applied really across the board. So again, using 9/11 Day, you know, it is the start of the school year, so you can kind of commit to a year of service and find ways for students to kind of say, like, what are they going to do? What are the issues that they're going to address? How are they going to be involved in service throughout the year? And and then using social media to share their ideas and post pictures and things like that. Another idea was to focus on students' mental health, to really sort of focus on bringing them together, building relationships, and again, you know, creating those opportunities for reflection and connection, and again, you know, using social media. And then also the idea of serving seniors, because they are quite isolated at this time. And so whether it's letter writing or doing like the virtual coffee, the virtual sing-along, creating lawn signs that they can see from their windows and brighten their day. So just a couple of ideas there. And if you want to go on to the next slide, a few more ideas. Heard a really great idea to create a virtual volunteer fair where you would be actually inviting nonprofits from the community who are focused on certain issues and have them kind of matched up in like the Zoom breakout rooms we've all seen, where students or young people can be matched up with those leaders in the community and just learn more about what their work is. The idea to support youth serving organizations, like I myself, I have another project that I'm working on with Higher Achievement, an after school program. They've already shifted all their program into virtual settings, and I know they could definitely use volunteers to support their tutoring and mentoring in that virtual setting. And there's several programs, you know, all over the place who are doing that work. So that's a way to continue your service. And then the idea to conduct community needs assessments. Those are like surveys and things like that you can do that don't require the in-person contact. And then as Amy mentioned, the idea of doing transcriptions and other virtual admin support for community organizations. So it's just taking the opportunity to hear from those community-based organizations about what they need administratively, and then that's the kind of service that can be done in this setting. So again, just some ideas that this came from those folks, you know, in higher education, that people working with college students, people working with K through 12 students who want to engage those folks in service, and these ideas came straight from them. So now I'm going to turn it over to YSA, because they actually have done this. They've been there, done that, so to speak, when they had Global Youth Service Day back in April, and we're able to do that even during this pandemic. So I'm going to turn it over to Mike and Karen.
Thanks, Emily, and thanks to CNCS for organizing this call today. I'm Karen Daniel. I'm the Vice President of Programs at Youth Service America, and I'm joined by my colleague, Mike Minks, and he and I will share some of the things that we have learned along the way in these past few months around how people can serve during the time of COVID. I know that we are joined by many of our great partners around the country on this call. If you're not familiar with YSA, we are a 33-year-old nonprofit organization that aims to engage youth ages 5 to 25 in really finding their voice, taking action, and having impact in their communities across a whole different variety of issues through service. Our signature event is Global Youth Service Day, which is an annual event held every April. So when COVID started closing things down in March, we had to really pivot very quickly in terms of how to help people planning projects across the country and around the world to adapt their projects. So Mike and I are going to tell you about 4 different strategies that we've been using. The first one that we really thought about, you see graphically here on your screen. We started thinking about what issues were affecting communities uniquely because of COVID. Maybe they were new issues, maybe they had been around a long time but were worse because of what was going on. And we started thinking about how youth could help to address these issues through service projects. We started with 10 issues, we're now up to 20. You see our website here on the screen, and on this page, we have links to a whole lot of different partners that focus on each one of these issues specifically. And each issue has sample projects that can be done, ranging from relatively simple short-term projects to longer, more advanced projects. Projects have things that are relevant for younger children and older children, and they're all organized according to the IPARTSE steps of investigation, planning, action, reflection, demonstration, and celebration, with links to both YSA's materials and that of our partners. The different project ideas are also organized according to the Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs. YSA uses that framework to really help young people think about their projects in a kind of a global framework of sustainable development. If you go to the next slide, you'll see here some early work that we did back in March to really kind of survey the field to see what they were doing in response to the coronavirus crisis. You see here at the top the term ASAP. And YSA uses this as a model for how youth can improve communities. Of course, we play on the ASAP idea of meaning we want youth to be involved now rather than waiting until they grow up to change the world. But we also use ASAP as an acronym for the 4 different ways that youth can really be involved in making a difference. And that's through awareness building, service, advocacy, and philanthropy. So you'll see a lot of our materials organized accordingly. We also started to look at some common types of activities that people were engaging in here on the lower left. And on the lower right, you'll see these activities starting to be addressed according to the global goals. So we used some of this early data to really kind of shape and mold the different resources that we were providing to the field of how they could continue to serve. So that was really our first strategy, was to start looking at specific issues that youth could address. And I will turn it over to my colleague, Mike, to take you into our second strategy. Mike, we can't hear you. Maybe you're muted.
Yep, sorry, I was muted. Before we jump in, there are quite a few questions around the IPARDSI process that you mentioned. And that is our planning process that the service learning field has used for a lot of years, but is certainly applicable to really any volunteer service project. And those steps are all outlined on the website, yz.org/COVID, attached to these ideas. And then we'll be sharing our general planning resources towards the end of our time, and those go into detail on all of those as well. The other thing that I would point out as we move on to the next slide, that much like Emily said, that even though these ideas are, we did them specific to youth because that's who we work with, there's certainly, almost all of them are applicable to volunteers of any age. So the second strategy that we really looked at was how to help people adapt the types of activities that they were already planning for the day of service. And we had moved over the last couple of years to additional types of activities beyond planning a direct service project. And so some of these may sound pretty familiar after hearing Amy's talk about the pathways of service from Stanford. We've been thinking about much the same thing of different ways that people can be civically involved in their communities on days of service. So you'll see some of those here, and they range from that pledge or recruiting to get involved in the longer term. We'll share our semester of service resource a little bit later, and so a lot of people can use these days of service to kick off a longer term service project by doing that investigation or starting some of that planning work. Looking at how we can recognize and celebrate volunteers. We all know as a volunteer management best practice that process of thanking volunteers and recognizing them is really critical, and is certainly one of the big reasons why volunteers choose to come back or don't. In issue advocacy, obviously this year is an election year with 9/11 Day happening just 2 months before the election. So looking at voter registration work, and as Sarah from CNCS points out in the chat, CNCS funds cannot be used for voter registration work or any partisan political activity during the election. So if you do receive CNCS funds, that you cannot use any of those for those activities. But certainly, as YSA definitely encourages that with other funds, private funds that you have, that's an important part of the engagement ecosystem. Looking at it as a time to build capacity, doing trainings, doing partnership meetings, the volunteer fair that Emily mentioned is a great idea here. So really looking at kind of the service-related activities that aren't engaging a lot of volunteers in a direct project. And the great thing for Global Youth Service Day and planning so quickly with just a month to go is that we were able to actually pull out ideas that already existed in each of these categories that were already on the website and that people were already planning and thinking about. And so we were able to excerpt out some specific opportunities that you see on the right side of the screen for that were much easier to adapt than some direct service projects were. On the next slide, you'll see the first set of tips that we'll share with you, and we've crowdsourced ideas and recommendations from our partners and grantees around the country and compiled them into these different strategies. So as we think about how you can take some of the existing activities that people were already planning as a group and turn them virtual. These are some of the recommendations that we've found. The first is in terms of the technology that people are using, go with the things that people in your community are already working with. So, in our case of working with young people, looking at what technology platforms the local school district was using, what your nonprofit is using, and really looking, using the things that people are already familiar with. Certainly in terms of young people, turning over the planning to them and letting them find creative ways to connect with each other and facilitate projects. Looking at thinking about individual check-ins. It can be really, when you're not meeting in person, it can be really easy for individual youth or individual project planners to kind of get lost when you're one of 20 or 30 people on a screen. In a little box, so that conducting those individual check-ins, and then finally paying attention to the technology access challenges. We know that many young people and many families may not have access to the right pieces of technology or to internet access, and so working with schools and libraries and other community organizations that have been helping people address that. Many of the telecom companies have done special programs for low-income families around internet access and increased data. There are definitely resources out there that you can tap into for assistance for your volunteers as well to be able to access that. With that, I'm going to turn it back over to Karen to talk about our third strategy.
Thanks, Mike. The third strategy that we started looking at was how to help people do projects from home, as families, in small groups, even as individuals. The screen that you see here is a page around a neat partnership that we developed with our funding partner, Hasbro, that we've worked with for many years. Hasbro funds another organization called Design for Change. And together they developed the Do Good from Home Challenge. And we thought this was perfect for Global Youth Service Day. We asked everyone who was planning an activity or a project to post their project, register it on our site, however they were sharing it, but to also include the hashtag Do Good from Home. Hasbro agreed to give a toy or a game for every project that was posted with this hashtag to an organization that was providing childcare for children of essential employees and workers, up to 25,000 toys and games. We found that this was a very meaningful incentive for a lot of our volunteers. They recognized that their project was having a double impact of both the impact of the project itself, as well as the additional toys and games that this was leveraging. And we are now about halfway through that 25,000 gift from Hasbro. So that will continue through the summer. And we're thinking that 9/11 Day could be the thing that just finishes it off. So encourage you to use this hashtag in the work that you're doing. On the next slide, you'll see another resource that we wanted to share with you. This is YSA's Ideas database. On our website, we have a page where people can search for project ideas. We don't tell young people what issue they should be focused on. We really want them to look around their communities, see what the needs are, see what they're passionate about, and act accordingly. But we know that sometimes it's really helpful to have a place to start. And sometimes when people see sample projects, they are inspired to really kind of run with that idea and adapt it for their own community. So for a long time, we've had on our site a searchable database where people can look by what we call Spark, or kind of their passion or their hobby, the thing that they love to do. So people can search by that. They can also search by issue area. But we also added a filter to show projects that could easily be done from home. And you'll see just 3 of those projects here at the bottom of your screen. So this is a great place to search for ideas if you're looking for inspiration and want to do something but aren't quite sure where to get started. On the next slide. You'll see some more tips that we've developed from people who are doing family or at-home activities. We've seen that kind of the idea of project in a box can be very helpful, where groups develop kind of really everything that someone needs to complete a project and can be dropped off or picked up or mailed. Guides for adult facilitators, whether it's parents or teachers or mentors, can be really helpful in terms of making a project flow smoothly at a time when adults are juggling a lot. Smaller events, of course, really kind of taking one large event and creating smaller versions of that event. We've seen groups organize competitions between neighborhoods or families to really kind of make it fun, and providing incentives kind of along the lines of what we were sharing around the Do Good from Home Challenge, with proceeds going to local charities and organizations. And with that, I'll turn it back to Mike to talk about our last strategy.
The fourth strategy that we looked at, starting on the next slide, is how people could still do some in-person projects. And we certainly didn't see a whole lot of that in April, just because we were still so very early on in figuring out how to adapt. But as we all, figure out new ways to live with the situation and protect ourselves, that we'll see more of those going forward. Certainly, as David mentioned, strong preference for outdoor projects. We know that's the safest approach, and so many gardening and cleanup and those kind of projects are already outside, and hopefully many others can be that might typically be indoors be brought outside. That may not be an option as we go later into the year and as we look ahead towards MLK Day and some things in the winter, but hopefully for 9/11, the weather will cooperate with us and let folks spend time outdoors. If you do have to stick to indoor, if that really is the only option, and you still want to move forward, making sure it's in large enough spaces and good enough airflow, and that you're taking all of the health precautions that we'll detail in just a minute. Thinking about how you can break apart big events or projects into multiple shifts or smaller groups. Instead of having 100 people all there at once for a period of an hour, maybe having groups of 25 people in 4 different shifts over the course of a morning or an afternoon. With a gardening project, for example, you might have one group prepare and clean up the area, one do digging, one do planting, one do mulching and watering and cleanup. You can break apart some of those different things, and you can imagine similar steps for a lot of other projects that you could break apart into shifts, and having those sequential tasks being done by different groups. And then a couple of reminders around all of the advice that we continue to hear and be recommended as we move on to the next slide, is of course providing all of the PPE, wearing masks, wearing gloves, having cleaning supplies available, hand washing stations, hand sanitizer available, the distance markers to help give people those signs of what 6 feet apart is actually in the space, and all none of those are particularly complicated, but do require some advanced planning. So you'll want to include that in your planning timeline, and if you do need to purchase any of those, including that in project and program budgets. Another tip or reminder is to really ensure pre-registration, sign-ins, so that you can control numbers that are showing up, and of course collecting and saving that contact information for all of the volunteers, so that if local public health officials do need to do contact tracing from anyone that was at the event later on, that you're able to provide that. Another tip that we saw that we really liked was the idea of having volunteers take a safety pledge as part of the orientation or introduction. Instead of just kind of lecturing all the volunteers, or just making them sign a waiver or something, that you kind of involve them in that reminder of the healthy behaviors that you want them to follow. And then finally, we see this as a really great opportunity to encourage families to volunteer together, since that can help help with kind of spacing issues, since the families do not need to be separated from other members of their own family. So can help deal with some of those distancing issues. On the next slide, I just want to point out that while we've talked about these 4 approaches as kind of separate strategies, that a lot of our partners and grantees are combining them in different ways. They're doing planning activities or training or preparation virtually, and then doing some limited in person. People are starting projects or compiling things at home and then dropping them off or putting them together in person. You can think about different phases to your activities, both for 9/11 Day and throughout the year. Continuing to the next slide, we obviously recommend, as David pointed out, that this really goes back to what your volunteers are going to feel comfortable with. So making sure that that you do provide multiple options. Maybe there is an in-person and is a virtual option. So offering that flexibility for people to do what they feel comfortable and safe doing, and making sure that those opportunities are available to everyone. Certainly, showcases or celebrations can be done virtually if they were doing something in person, in small groups or at home, so that you can still have that group approach, and the sense of the crowd, and then a final idea around partnering with community television or local media to do broadcasting or live streaming of the events, or how to segments for what folks can do at home. So lots of different ways that you can mix and match some of these different approaches, and hopefully provide opportunities for kind of every situation that you might be facing. And then I'm going to turn it back over to Karen to talk about some of our other resources that we recommend for you to use. And as I do that, there were several questions around resources related to racism and social justice, since that's obviously the other key big issue of the summer. And there are several resources shared in the chat, and ysa.org/anti-racist is our collection of resources around that, if you want to check that out. And with that, back to you, Karen.
Thanks, Mike. On the next slide, you'll see our landing page for 9/11 Day, which has a lot of resources, some of which we've discussed on the call already. It has resources from YSA, as well as links to resources from 911day.org with David and Jay's great team, as well as CNCS resources and a couple of other of our partners as well. If you go to the next slide, you'll see YSA's kind of general resources that we encourage people to use for any day of service. All of the resources, I should say, on our website are free of charge and can be downloaded from the site. The 4 main resources you see here, the first is our Youth Changing the World Guide. This is designed to be really kind of a soup to nuts strategy for planning a service project. The Kids in Action Guide is a similar guide geared for younger children. The Semester of Service Teacher Toolkit is designed to be used in a classroom setting to facilitate service learning that connects academic learning and service projects, and to be done over a multi-week to multi-month period. We do encourage classrooms to begin a project on 9/11 Day, launching their fall semester, and really continue that project throughout the fall semester, culminating with either the end of the calendar year or Martin Luther King Day in January. So we see a lot of schools and classrooms doing that. The last resource, Classrooms with a Cause, is also designed to help groups, and primarily school groups, really kind of plan a capstone project to apply what they've learned to a social or environmental issue in their community. Not as many academic links around kind of the service learning focus, but really designed more to help people apply what they've learned in school through a project. If you go to the next slide, you'll see resources that we've developed specific to 9/11 Day, and many with support from the Corporation for National and Community Service. The first resource is a collection of reflections and observations on 9/11 Day and service project ideas that we've developed kind of in correspondence to those reflections, and how people can think about the meaning of the day linked to how they're serving. The We Stand Strong toolkit is something that we developed in partnership with Save the Children and CNCS around disaster preparedness projects specifically. And the last two are resources that we designed with Scholastic for use with schools and classrooms, and parents and families can certainly make use of these as well around 9/11 Day project ideas. So again, all of these are available on our site. We'd love for you to use them and download them. And with that, I will close the YSA section and turn it back to our call facilitators.
Hi, this is Rhonda. Sarah is going to facilitate some questions and Q&A now. I know that many of them we've had a lot of questions in the chat and a lot of answers. If you have other questions or some that you would like to bring up again because you don't feel like your answer was adequate, please put it in the Q&A box. This is Rhonda. I also posted a big, an email address, engagement@cns.gov. If you have follow-up questions that are not necessarily day of service, or if they are day of service, please feel free to send them to me. Or if you need help connecting with one of our presenters, I'm happy to do that too. So Sarah, take it away.
Thanks, Rhonda. I had to unmute myself there. So we have several questions here in the Q&A box. We did get a few questions asking if this is going to be recorded. Just to emphasize again, yes, we are recording this webinar, and we can send out the link to the recording hopefully next week, but we can get it to you. So we will not be doing certificates of participation, though. I think we got a question on that. So we had a few questions related to addressing racism in communities, and I know YSA touched on that. The specific questions were, would you please explain in more detail what activities are planned for addressing racism? I would be very interested in setting something up with my volunteers on this in Omaha. And then another one related to that is I manage a senior companion program in Omaha, Nebraska, and I'm wondering if other senior companion programs are out there or doing something around how to address racism. So YSA, I think you took a crack at this, but does David or folks at George Washington University National Center for Civic Engagement want to respond to this?
Yeah, this is David. I'll just initially weigh in to let you know that in the process of putting together the at-home program, we're curating quite a number of easy to do service projects related to ending racism. And we'll try to get those to you as early as we possibly can in the context of what we're building. So again, if you can, send an email to me at info@911day.org, or you can just send it to my email, which is david.payne, P-A-I-N-E, @911day.org. I'll just get that, get you on the list, and we'll get some of those ideas out to you. But there are some terrific things that you can do of an education nature that can be very meaningful, related to helping to end racism and to educate people, particularly people of all color, about the importance of identifying what is really systemic in terms of racism in our country. It's of course, there's a lot of it that is very deliberate and overt, but unfortunately, there's quite a bit that isn't. It's just under the current that just happens just because of the way things are structured in society. And so education is going to be the biggest part of helping to overcome some of that, to awaken people to the significance of it. And it feels like the country's heading in that direction. But we'll be happy to provide absolutely everything that we've researched and developed for your benefit.
Thanks, David. Amy or Emily, did you have anything to add to that one?
A few years back, we created a toolkit for 9/11 Day for higher eds that is specifically focused around bringing people from different backgrounds together. So specifically focused on diversity and inclusion, not necessarily racism, but diversity and inclusion. And I put the address in the chat. I'll add it in again. You can access it. It's a downloadable toolkit for 9/11 Day around diversity and inclusion.
And Sarah, this is Rhonda. From the CNCS side of the house, we'll work on aggregating these resources or links to these resources from our colleagues on the phone today on our 9/11 Day website to make it easy to find all the information if you forget a single site.
Thanks, Rhonda. It's good to know they'll be all together in one place. Next question. Any suggestions for us to do with youth at a juvenile correctional facility because they have very limited resources? Would any of our presenters like to take a stab at that one?
Notice there was one answer that they from a participant that said at a jail in Europe they pack supplies in collaboration with not-for-profits, which are delivered to impoverished students. Their system is very different in Europe, unfortunately, than ours is. I'm wondering if any of your juvenile systems have partnerships with local shelters. I know shelters are, everyone wants an animal these days, but a lot of them are engaged in training of animals and things like that. And I wonder if that's a possibility for your youth program too.
Okay.
And Rhonda, this is Amy. I would add that if you're able to bring supplies in, you could create early childhood materials. They could be distributed to families. There's all kinds of games and letter recognition and those kinds of things that you can do if you pre-make the parts and are able to bring them into the juvenile justice facility and prepare them there.
And Amy, I know you all do a lot of that at GW. Are there resources online that you can share?
Yes, I can do that. Not right at this moment, but I can get it to you for the follow-up.
Okay, thank you.
We did have a few questions related about outdoor activities. One person asked, are we encouraging volunteers to donate food or money rather than do outdoor activities? Another similar one that I saw in the chat box was temperature checks and other COVID symptoms related checks only apply to individuals who are showing symptoms, but a symptomatic COVID individual can still infect others. So how do you plan to address those individuals on some of these guidelines you're referring to, if gatherings, whether they're outside or indoors, or are still being encouraged to happen? Is there a developed safety pledge was another question.
This is Emily. I'll just respond to that. I think that that's something where the community-based organizations and nonprofit organizations that may be, the partners in this and maybe providing the service opportunity, they would likely have the sort of set of standard operating procedures that they've developed for their volunteers during this time. So I think that's how that would be addressed, is through the organizations where the service, the service recipients, or where the service is taking place, or who the service is taking place through.
And somewhat related to that is another question. Is there any ideas for our older volunteers that have difficulty with technology and are more at risk, so not going out?
Go ahead.
It's Emily again, and I was just going to say, so the idea that was generated from our listening sessions around card, mailing cards to whether it's their peers or other seniors, or any veterans or service members. So that kind of letter writing campaign, I think, is a great idea for that scenario.
And just, this is Rhonda, and just phone calls.
Mm-hmm.
And getting a phone call from someone else in your community just to check in and see how the day's going is a really great thing, especially for folks who've been at home for a long time and don't feel comfortable going out.
I'm also seeing in the Q&A box that someone responded to that question as well. Jeff Turnbull says, some of my RSVP volunteers have recorded reading books and sent the tape to children's residential facilities. So that seems another way that seniors can participate without going outdoors or having to have super tech skills.
Yeah, and it is one of the categories of sort of service projects that we're putting together as under the at-home kit. So it's focusing in on people who are older who may not be that interested in, technology and using computers for different things. I mean, obviously, there's a wealth of things that people can do to help one another and be supportive without a computer. And so we're definitely going to be addressing that as well. So we'll make sure that that's front and center in some of the things we do.
Thanks, David. We got some questions earlier in the chat box that were answered, and I'm going to share some of those. We had, when you are registering to be a part of this 9/11 day at home, or are we going to have prescribed remote service activities sent to us? Or is it that just us saying we stand in partnership with you all and we will come up with our own organizational remote service activity?
Well, that's a great question. So we're absolutely going to provide quite a few really great remote service activities, and they're going to span different types of issues of concern and causes. But that said, there are quite a few organizations that may want to sort of borrow some of those, but also weave in some of their own that they feel would be particularly relevant to their particular audience. So that's why I think it's we want to give you a head start now, so you can start thinking a little bit about, if you could ask your audience what 11 things you would want them to do, recognizing they might only do one, what would be the 11 choices that you might consider? So yes, we're definitely going to provide a lot of terrific, well-curated and well-considered remote related activities that have got easy to do capabilities. Many of them are going to be digital, as you might imagine. But that said, we want to encourage you to think about 9/11 Day is Giving Tuesday, your chance to spread your message to an audience of Americans that are fundamentally looking for things to do. So just be aware, we're going to be running a significant communications campaign across the country with lots and lots of marketing partners. We're creating a climate for you where millions of people are going to be looking for things to do. All you need to do is ask them. So think about putting on your schedule a plan to sort of begin to announce your involvement in 9/11 Day sometime in late August, and sort of build up to that moment where you're getting individuals to help you however you're looking for help. So take full advantage of it. It's going to be particularly this year, it could be a historic opportunity for you to get the support you need in a difficult time.
Thanks. We had another question. Michael, it looks like you already answered this one in the Q&A, but I think other people might be interested. So I'd like you to share your answer here on the line. For volunteering and contact tracing, who do you connect with to train students?
Sure, and my recommendation on that was two things. One is in most places it's your local public health agency, so usually at the county level that's going to be in charge of that. So go to them to figure out what's going on locally and where, if they need help and what they're doing around that. And then I shared a link to the CDC's website that has resources and information about contact tracing. So I'm gonna go.
Thanks. Would you mind putting that in the chat, Michael? Do you mind
sure,
putting that link in the chat so everyone can see it?
Yep.
Okay, thanks. Looks like we got a couple responses from our audience on a few early questions. So related to the question on youth detention facilities, Lynn Keach says, in West Michigan, we have an organization called Kids Food Basket, and both adult and youth at local prisons and youth detention centers have decorated the paper sacks in which this is volunteered. Your community may have an opportunity to do something like that as well. The inspiration messages and artwork have been instrumental to both the artist and the recipient. Thanks for sharing, Lynn. Any specific suggestions of virtual activities for K through 5 classroom RSVP volunteers?
Anybody want to address that one?
Thinking our folks at YSA or maybe Rhonda?
Well, I also think that Amy's idea of those literacy kits, maybe the younger children can't, but certainly the 3rd through 5th graders can help with making literacy kits for the younger kids in class. They could send packets home to the kids if they're at home, or if they're at school, deliver packets that can be done for 9/11 day, and they can be done at home and brought back. The decorating sacks for food donations can be a great thing. Could also be for delivering, items, a note that goes into items that are taken to shelters for, even little kids can draw a picture that can go into a bag of items that may be going to shelters or other organizations like senior centers and things like that. So I think there are a lot of things that involve drawing and art that certainly could be a K-5 activity.
And this is Amy. I would add too that I've seen some beautiful intergenerational projects where the K-5 students build pen pals or learn about each other's backgrounds and culture depending on the community. You could exchange recipes, or you could ask seniors to talk about healthy foods. I mean, you can really adapt these to whatever the children are learning or interested in, or whatever folks in their community are interested in learning about. You could also engage K-5 students in talking about how to address COVID-19 in their own way, so they could become educators for other people about how to stay healthy and safe in this time.
I think a similar. Go ahead,
Sarah. No, go ahead, Sarah.
I was just going to say, in the Q&A box, it looks like we also got an answer to that. Someone's saying they're planning to do Zoom disaster preparedness presentations to K through 12. I also see a few suggestions for it in the chat as well. Go ahead, Rhonda.
So someone posted virtual learning with a local zoo. I know that the zoo in, I think it's Dayton, Ohio, has a really great online program. And there are tons of museums. You could do virtual learning with museums for 9/11 too, which could be really great.
Okay, we've had several, we're nearing the end here, and I want to make sure I get this answered. We've had several questions come up in question and answer box related to our presenters' contact information, as well as the resources online that some of you discussed. Would the presenters mind putting in the chat box their links to their website, or if they have like a general email box that they wouldn't mind being emailed at? I think that would be helpful for some of our audience members so they know where they can follow up. Rhonda and Sharon, is there any other questions in the Q&A box or in the chat that you think is worth trying to answer here in the last 5-10 minutes?
Someone asked earlier, are we saying don't do indoor projects? I think, no, we are not saying that. We are saying follow local guidelines, and it may be harder to pull those off in a safe environment, but so we are not saying don't do it. We're just saying be careful. And we did get some liability issues raised. You know, for young people, YSA may want to talk about how you address liability with young people. And, you know, many people have a liability form at their as part of their service projects. YSA, you want to talk about liability with young people and in-person volunteering?
Sure. We typically leave that to the local partner or grantee, since we're not, you know, at YSA's office, the one directly working with young people. So typically falls under, you know, the school or the youth development program or the after-school program or the nonprofit that they're a part of. And you know, they usually would have, you know, their own forms and their own processes for that. So, you know, recommend that you know, to kind of partner and work through one of those institutions where the youth already are, that would already have that dealt with.
I think we have time for maybe 1 or 2 more questions here. I see one from Sarah Connor, and I think this is directed to YSA and our folks over at George Washington. Any ideas for alternative transportation to service sites? I'm from a college campus and we rely heavily on vans and buses to get out into the community. Our plans are for outdoor sites and walking distance, but would be open to hearing about this if possible.
This is Emily. I mean, as Amy mentioned, in DC, there's Metro, which, you know, is sanitized regularly and folks can wear masks. And then I think exactly what the question said. I mean, walking distance. I mean, you know, there really is no other possibility of, without vans and without buses, of having a socially distanced transportation. And Mike and Karen, you may have another idea.
Not specific to youth, but we have seen, you know, both Uber and Lyft, and I think some of the scooter companies, you know, have, you know, donation programs where they'll donate credit to nonprofits. We've seen some of our partners use those. But yeah, otherwise, I think, you know, we're hearing a lot of the same challenges. You know, that you typically rely on the school bus system, and so people are having to revert to, you know, this kind of at home or within walking distance. Unfortunately, I don't know that we have a better answer.
Okay, this one is also related to college age students. Any advice for mobilizing students in college to stay engaged in service while many may still be participating in a virtual college experience and will not be physically on campus, especially as it relates to voter education and engagement service? I know you guys shared a lot of ideas today, but would you maybe mind recapping one specific to voter education and engagement service?
Sure. YSA.org/vote basically has kind of everything and a lot of key partners. And at the college level, Paul Loeb, the author of Soul of a Citizen and a couple of other books, has the Campus Election Engagement Project that you can, I'll drop the URL in. And the Campus Vote Initiative, and Amy, I don't remember if you talked about NASPA or not, but I believe they have an initiative. There are 3 or 4 students learn, students vote. There's quite a few kind of leading organizations out there that are working on on civic engagement in higher ed that have a lot of
So, everyone, Amy lost power for a minute and got kicked off. I was also going to mention that MTV is working with several partners around Power the Polls, and they are trying to help get, they're running this initiative to get younger people involved in being poll workers, not a partisan political activity, but poll workers as in, checking people in and all that sort of stuff. And so you might check out Power the Polls if you're interested. Most of those signups are in process now, but it certainly would be something that that college students and others, frankly, could post on 9/11 that they've committed to work in a poll on election day or something like that too.
And Rhonda, just to build on that, and thank you for bringing that up. It's such a terrific program. There's another one too that World Central Kitchen is launching called Chefs for Democracy. And they're going to be actually feeding people that will be standing in line at polls waiting to vote. And they just came out with an announcement fairly recently. So you might just explore that as well, because I know they're going to be looking for volunteers to help support that program in many, many communities, particularly where there are going to be fewer polling places because of the COVID pandemic. So check out Chefs for Democracy under the World Central Kitchen.
Thanks, David. And Rhonda, I think I'm going to have that be the last question. Rhonda, did you want to say any closing remarks before we open the polls for our audience's feedback?
Yes, there are a few things. One is that we do have a poll/survey. We hope you'll complete it. CNCS, if you go to nationalservice.gov, there is a link under our COVID resources to 10 things one can do to volunteer safely. Please feel free to take a look at those. I would say again, engagement@cns.gov. If you from your organization have toolkits and things like that, please feel free to share them with us. They are certainly useful to inform what we can distribute and share with our grantees and partners. So we'd love to hear from you on the ground of things that you've developed as well, and you can share those at engagement@cns.gov. All of our partners have given you email addresses and websites. If you forget those, can't find them, engagement@cns.gov is an easy one to remember, and I will help connect you. We are so grateful and happy to have had all of you on the call today, and those of you that may have been on Facebook Live. And we look forward to seeing all of the great projects that you will do for 9/11 and going forward. None of us mentioned project registration. If you come to our website and go to our 9/11 section, we will have a link where you can register your project if you're looking for volunteers. But also it helps us have a understanding of the kinds of projects that are going on across the country, and helps us to promote them broadly to those who fund us in Congress and our other partners who may be looking for opportunities and ideas. Even if you don't look for a lot of volunteers, it's great if you list your volunteer project so others are inspired and learn from your activities. So one last call from our partners if you have any last comments, but we thank you and we look forward to hearing from you going forward.
Thank you.
All right.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Yep, I think that wraps it up today.